Hello, everyone. This is Coach Clayton, and this is a Women's Empowerment Interview episode. And today we have Debbie. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, and Debbie is going to discuss her journey of overcoming personal and professional obstacles in her life. Debbie, just to give you a quick overview, I'm an accountability coach. And the reason why I created this podcast was for women just to come to my channel, my YouTube channel every week for inspiration. You know what I mean? Because there's so much going on in this world, and I wanted to be a part of positivity. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to give you a background. So welcome, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be a part of all of it, of the positivity, of the inspiration of all of it. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Debbie, your background intrigued me. I said, I definitely have to have her on to chat, give a little inspiration. I know that you had stated like one of your biggest obstacles was the negative feelings around your body.
Absolutely.
Right? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so I think, let me start by saying I felt that my negative feelings around my body were unique. And I thought that it meant that something was wrong with my body. So I was raised by a mom who is 72 and to this day has a very active eating disorder that she's still struggling with. So at the age of 6, she put me on my first diet. It was a preventative diet so that I wouldn't undergo what she had gone through. And so at the age of 6, I was really taught that there are good bodies and there are bad bodies. And that if you have a bad body, that you should do everything you can to fix it and make it a good body. So that by the time I was in high school, I had my own eating disorder. I got into therapy. I did all the right things. I got into therapy. I started working with a dietitian and I got rid of the eating disorder behaviors. But I guess I sort of thought, I just have to sort of hate the way I look for the rest of my life, right? I get to hate the way I look and I get to, feel guilty every time I eat anything, but at least I'm eating and I'll stay alive. And so I actually came out to Los Angeles to act. And it was just sort of reinforced the good body, bad body thing. My manager called me at one time and she said, "Are you sitting down?" And I was like, "Uh-oh, what's going on?" And she said, "Well, I'm having a hard time with you because you're not pretty enough to be the pretty girl, but I don't want you to gain 100 pounds to be her best friend. So I think you should get your nose done." Yeah, I know. And here's where I was in it is I did. And here's the most messed up part of it is I started going out on auditions. I went from not being called in to being called in because all of a sudden I fit a little bit more of a aesthetically acceptable norm. And so here I was hating my body. Now I had no excuse to not be working as an actress, except for the fact that I wouldn't book a role. I couldn't blame it on my nose. I couldn't blame it on my body. And I was an unsuccessful actress. And so I became a personal trainer to pay the bills while I was auditioning. And that is sort of where I had that moment. Because I had women of all different shapes and sizes and colors coming to me asking me to fix their body. And I kept having that thought. I was like, well, when are they going to notice that my stomach's wrong or my this is wrong, And that's when I realized, oh, wow, feeling this way isn't a symptom of your body being wrong. Feeling this way, we've all been programmed by a very, very broken culture to feel this way. And so, the world treats smaller bodies very different than it treats bigger bodies. But I look back, I remember all the times in my life that I thought I was fat. And now I look back and I'm like, Debbie, you've never been fat a day in your life. I was born with thin privilege. My mom has thin privilege. Again, my mom thinks she was fat. She has thin. We have never been viewed by the world as someone in a bigger body. We have never experienced that prejudice, and all of that internal conflict has been ours. And the feelings that we have in our thin bodies aren't really different from the feelings that women have with bigger bodies, right? And again, the world treats us very differently, but we all feel the same way. So maybe it's not the body. And that's when I decided to sort of take a step back and say, okay, if the problem isn't my body, then maybe the diet and the exercise and everything is kind of attacking the wrong problem. Maybe we have to fix a different problem. And so now I help women make peace with their body, because I have yet to find a woman who, you know, it's not size specific. It's not a question of how attractive you are, because nobody's really allowed to feel good about themselves. So, so now I want women to be able to love their body, even when they don't always like it, because I think a relationship with your body is like any other relationship. And I always compare it to my husband, and I think he's fantastic and he's sweet and he's sexy and he cooks, and I find him annoying sometimes. And I get really frustrated at his man cold, the perpetual, like he always gets sicker than me. And it's just over it, you know, except for I'm not going to toss him out because of his man colds, right? I can be annoyed at him. I can say, oh man, here comes a man cold. All right. I'm not going to enjoy being with him for like a week and a half, even though it will last me 3 days, the whole thing. Right. And then I can still love him and enjoy all the wonderful things about him. And I think women need to learn, not just women, honestly, everybody needs to learn to feel that way about their body. But it's hard because
it is.
Everything in our culture teaches us to feel bad. So that's kind of what I dedicated my life to doing now.
I love it. I love it. Because when we look at it, society tells us what the perfect body type is. And even if you are in the perfect body type, a lot of times women are working to be better or look better. They're looking for perfection.
Well, the problem is, I think culturally, our culture has equated thinness with morality. So it's almost like you can never be really thin enough, because if you're a thin person, you're a good person. And it's not true, right? Our culture also associates thin with healthy, right? So I mean, think of and I would be lying if I said I haven't been programmed in to have some of these thoughts, right? My job is to identify those thoughts as, oh, Debbie, that's your cultural bias. That's your own personally integrated fat phobia that we are working to overcome. But you have definitely seen someone in a bigger body and thought, oh, God, they're so fucking lazy. I don't even know if I'm allowed. I don't know.
No, you are. Okay. Go ahead. It's fine.
You know, we've had, I know people have had that thought, because I've had that thought. And some of the women that I work with who are in fat bodies think that about themselves. And I talk to them and I say, well, I hear you waking up and doing things full speed from first thing in the morning until late at night. I hear you doing work to help all these other people. And yet you think you're lazy. And the answer always kind of comes back to, well, yeah, I'm fat. I have to be lazy. If I weren't lazy, I wouldn't be fat. And so we have this cultural bias, and we're missing the needs of a lot of people. And you know, it's interesting, because with that fat bias, fat people aren't getting appropriate healthcare. But you know who isn't also getting appropriate healthcare? Sometimes thin people, because they're just sort of like, oh, you're fine, you're thin, you're healthy. And so it's such a big problem. And you're not, and there's never going to be enough, I think, because you're right. Even the women who look like what we're taught to look like. I mean, again, if you equate value and morality with thinness, then there's going to be a perpetual fear of losing it, right? Even if you have that quote unquote perfect body. God forbid you eat a piece of cake and do something wrong and get a little bit of a bulge, and then you go from being a good person to a bad person. There's no way to win. Nobody gets to feel good. So it's not about our bodies. It's about this bigger cultural issue, really.
It is. How important is self-talk?
It's very important. But what I think I try to coach my women through with the self-talk is I think the negative talk is, again, it's been programmed in, right?
Yes.
And with as much work as I've done, and I do this professionally, I've been doing this professionally for a very long time, the voice still pops up in my head. I still hear some of those negative thoughts. And I think that the best way to handle the self-talk is instead of just sort of like, I think there's different things that we've sort of been taught to do. We've either been taught to ignore, cover our ears. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you, which oftentimes makes the voice get much louder. Because it's like, if you can't hear me, let me say it a little loud, But I think one of the other things that we've been taught to do is just sort of apologize to the voice. Like, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Tell me how to fix this. And my challenge to the women that I work with is let's get really curious about that voice, which feels uncomfortable at first. Okay. We're going to learn to make friends with that voice, because that voice is actually going to teach us something. It's going to teach us when our body is stressed. It's going to teach us when we're not feeling safe. But if you hear something in your head say you're a fat ass, or you're lazy, or you're this, ask it a question. Right. Why do you say I'm lazy? Why? Right. And if the only answer is the size of your body, does the size that you get to keep getting curious, right? Does the size of your body actually make you lazy? What does lazy mean? Well, lazy means you don't do anything. You don't take on your responsibilities. You don't, and we start listing it. And when we get curious, we get to say, oh, wow, that's a cultural norm I'm holding on to. I'm not lazy. I'm allowed to feel lazy without being lazy, right? And so it starts to give us the ability to let that voice kind of live, do its thing. It's going to be there, right? It's constantly being reinforced by the messaging we're getting in the world, but you no longer have to be at its mercy, really. And so it's uncomfortable to get curious about the voice, because you're going to talk to a voice you've been afraid of for a really, really long time. But that's what I help my women learn to do, so that they feel safe while doing it.
Nice. Now, we just discussed voices, but what about women that had real life experiences, traumatic experiences about their weight? You know what I mean?
I do.
What would be your advice to them? Because they actually have lived experience of this.
It's interesting. Yeah, again, I think our world treats people in fat bodies very different than it treats people in thin bodies. I have to recognize, again, my thin privilege in the same way that I have to recognize my white privilege, which can be a very hard, humbling thing to do, right? Because I think here's the thing about privilege is we like to think that this is what makes us a good person, but it's not, right? I'm not a good person because I'm thin. I'm not a good person because I'm white. These are circumstances I was born into that made it easier for me to achieve certain things.
Exactly.
So it's tough. I think there's this myth in our culture that you get to pick what size your body is. There's a myth that if you do it right, your body will be a certain size. And that's not true. And some of the women I know who are eating the least amount of food ever are women in fat bodies. So a couple of things that I think the first thing is we need to start using the word fat as if it's not a shameful word. Like, it can be a descriptor. Like, my eyes are blue, my cheeks are pink, my teeth are straight, my waistline is thin, these are ways to describe. And when we sort of shy away from the word fat and we use words like fluffy or big boned or something like that, what we're really doing is reinforcing the fact that this person is of less value, because of the size of their body. So it's going to probably feel uncomfortable for, especially for the fat people, but the truth is it feels uncomfortable for thin people to use the word fat as well. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that I would say is, again, if we recognize that body size is a privilege, right? That bodies do come in different shapes and sizes, just like they come in different colors and ethnicities and backgrounds, then again, we get to sort of make this space for, oh, these negative thoughts are mine, right? And sadly, if you have fat phobia, if you've experienced fat phobia, if you are a person in a bigger body, those views are shared by a lot of people. That's unfortunate. You know, I think that fat phobia is sort of one of the last completely culturally acceptable forms of, you know, I mean, honestly, it's all created into this form of what a body should look like. And all of the ideal bodies are based on white bodies. And then even in those white bodies, it's like 2% of white people look like this. So fat phobia is a culturally acceptable form of racism. Fat phobia is, you know, it's really all of that.
Interesting.
So again, to reinforce that reminder that it's so easy to hear that and translate that into, this is my fault, I should be fixing this. And we have to remember, this is not your fault. So it's not about our bodies. It's about this bigger cultural issue, really.
It is. How important is self-talk?
It's very important. But what I think I try to coach my women through with the self-talk is, I think the negative talk is, again, it's been programmed in, right? And with as much work as I've done, and I do this professionally, I've been doing this professionally for a very long time, the voice still pops up in my head. I still hear some of those negative thoughts. And I think that the best way to handle the self-talk is, instead of just sort of like, I think there's different things that we've sort of been taught to do. We've either been taught to ignore, you know, cover our ears. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Which oftentimes makes the voice get much louder. It's like, if you can't hear me, let me say it a little loud, you know. But I think one of the other things that we've been taught to do is just sort of apologize to the voice. Like, you're right. I'm sorry. Tell me how to fix this. And my challenge to the women that I work with is, let's get really curious about that voice, which feels uncomfortable at first. Okay. We're going to learn to make friends with that voice, because that voice is actually going to teach us something. It's going to teach us when our body is stressed. It's going to teach us when we're not feeling safe. But if you hear something in your head say, you're a fat ass, or you're lazy, or you're this, ask it a question. Right. Why do you say I'm lazy? Why? Right. And if the only answer is the size of your body, does the size that you get to keep getting curious, right? Does the size of your body actually make you lazy? What does lazy mean? Well, lazy means you don't do anything. You don't take on your responsibilities. You don't, and we start listing it. And when we get curious, we get to say, oh, wow, that's a cultural norm I'm holding on to. I'm not lazy. I'm allowed to feel lazy without being lazy, right? And so it starts to give us the ability to let that voice kind of live, do its thing. It's going to be there, right? It's constantly being reinforced by the messaging we're getting in the world, but you no longer have to be at its mercy, really. And so it's uncomfortable to get curious about the voice, because you're going to talk to a voice you've been afraid of for a really, really long time. So there's power, and your immunity builds up and gets stronger as you get comfortable. What we come back to from the beginning, which is talking to that voice as opposed to shutting it down, right?
Exactly.
Knowing that voice can exist and can't hurt me. It can talk to me, but it can't hurt me.
Right? That's it. It's okay for me to feel that whatever I'm feeling, it's okay for me to process it.
Yeah.
I love that.
I remember when I was in the worst of my eating disorder, I got my period at, like, I think the age of 11 or 12, but at 16, I was so skinny, I had stopped getting my period. And I've always been a migraine sufferer. And I had a migraine that, like, just never went away for like 6 months. And I wasn't eating. And in retrospect, I'm like, of course I stopped getting my period. And of course I had a migraine. Like, now if I'm like an hour late for dinner, my head starts to hurt. So, I mean, but I went to the doctor, we did all the MRIs, we did all the tests, and I was told, you're healthy. It's just, you just got migraines. And again, I was thin, so it was kind of, and that's a problem, right? And you've also got, on the other side, you've got fat people going in with complaints about something like migraines or anything really. And the doctor's like, come back to me when you've lost some weight.
Exactly.
And nobody wins in this situation.
Yes.
Nobody wins.
Wow. This was really, I could talk to you for hours. Then.
I know, we could do that. I'm doing this. This is my favorite subject to talk about. So I very brilliantly created a line of work around it so that all I have to ever do is talk about this. But this is my favorite thing. So please.
Love it.
Feel free to reach out at any time. I'll totally talk about this all the time.
Nice. And can you just give us, I know that we're going to post your websites and your information in the description box, but can you also say how to find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is bodyrelationship.com. And you can find me, I'm actually very active on Instagram. And on Instagram, you can find me I'm at bodyrelationship_coach. I'll even, you know what? I'm going to give you my email address. Here we go. Are you ready? It's Debbie, like the little Debbie snack cakes, DEBBIE, last name Saroufim, S as in Sam, AROU, F as in Frank, IM as in Mary @gmail.com.
This has been fun. So much fun. Thank you so much, Debbie.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much. Please have me back. This was
of
really
course.
fun.
Of course.
Really fun. Awesome.